Bart, you obviously played under Pete Carroll before he left for the Seahawks. You also played with Lane Kiffin. Like, what are your prevailing thoughts about USC as a whole right now after playing for those two great coaches?
It's a storied program. They've continued the tradition of Heisman Trophy winners, right, with Caleb Williams. I think the one glaring kind of overarching theme that people want to see is a championship again. And it's hard to do these days, and you know what that's like being at Bama. And I think having that standard for so many years when Pete Carroll was there, that standard was so high that people expect that now. And after the sanctions, when I was there, it took a few years to, I think, kind of rebound from going from Lane to Sark to Clay Helton, and finally bringing in Lincoln Riley, who's got a great track record, has a great history of coaching quarterbacks. I think the one thing is just you got to win, and as Al Davis said, just win, baby, win, and that's kind of the sentiment right now. They made a quarterback change this last week, going from Miller Moss to Jada Maeva, and I think that was a good move, honestly. As hard of a decision as that was, I think Jaden's got a real bright future. But overall, I think the school spirit and the hype of the program is there. They just need to close some of those close ones.
Now, you said something, and I've obviously dealt with this, where you talk about, the standard that is set by a coach, the excellence that is set by a guy like Pete Carroll or a guy like Nick Saban. When it goes from his standard to the expectations from fans, from people who watch your program, from people who cheer for you, like that overwhelming standard it's either that or bust. Like, talk about how it is dealing with that. When you feel like, a coach is just implementing himself, implementing his system, and like guys want to follow that. But then you got people who've never stepped on the field, never played, and that's just their natural born expectation when they cheer you on.
I think I have a different perspective now looking from the outside in. And as a player, I just remember being so kind of just almost horse blinders to the noise that I didn't always factor in what, like, the message. I didn't look at message boards, or like Twitter wasn't even really a thing when I was in college. And all the fan noise.
Was it MySpace back in that day?
Pretty much. It was Netscape, or it was the early days of the web.
AOL.
Yeah, AIM is where all the action was. But I just remember just being like just locked into what Pete had or what Lane Kiffin had. And that was kind of narrative. Now you got to filter out a lot more noise as a player, I feel like. Everyone has a voice, especially on social media, that they can get to you. I think that's becoming more of a factor, and I think it's more of a challenge for kids to kind of just buy in, stay locked in. I think another aspect of college football, which we can unpack later, is just kind of the loyalty aspect, and there's a lot of layers to that, right? With the NIL, the transfer portal, kind of this culture, this new era of kids coming up.
Right.
But like I was all in. Like there was no doubt in my mind that SC was where I wanted to go. And through the sanctions, when we could transfer out, some people did, but I'm like, no, we're going to see this through. And so navigating that and just having that underlying foundation of loyalty, I don't feel like that's a top quality that a lot of kids have in college football anymore across the board. But that's
definitely an art that has been lost, like the loyalty aspect and being committed to the program more so than the progress or the results
or your own NIL value. Yeah,
exactly. Like there's so many things these kids have to factor in. Like you said, we'll get into that a little bit later. But you mentioned Kiffin and Pete Carroll in the same breath. And now I've never played for Pete Carroll, but when I look at Pete and then I look at Lane, I see two completely different personalities, two different coaching styles, like two different guys. What was that transition like for you?
So I grew up watching Pete Carroll during the golden age of Carson Palmer, Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush, Lendale White, Dwayne Jarrett, like all the Heisman winning trophies of the national championships and packed coliseums. So I just expected like all that goodness and the high level of play, that standard to be the norm. And playing under him, he's still one of my favorite coaches I've ever played for. He just had a way about him where, in a healthy way, you feared disappointing him. And there was just he brought the best out of you. He knew how to have fun, right? You see him always bouncing around the sidelines. Even as the oldest coach in the NFL, he was still bouncing around. He has
some spring in his step now.
He would just be playing catch on the sideline in warm-ups, And so he kind of set that standard. And then Lane came in almost with a target on his back too, just from that exit he had at Tennessee. A lot of controversy in some aspects, and
wait, hold on. Lane Kiffin and controversy? Like, really? No, I would have never thought.
Somewhat synonymous, but I think he had an uphill battle to climb, especially with the reduction in scholarships that we had when he first got there, and the bowl games that we couldn't play in. But I can say with 100% confidence, he is probably the best play caller I've ever been around. Him, I think Brian Dable is up there just in terms of seeing between the lines and scheming. But Lane, and whether it's because he just wants to put up numbers and it's a pride thing or whatever it is, but he knew how to dial it up. And granted, I had like Robert Woods and Marquise Lee and Nelson Aguilar at receivers, and he knew how to bring the best out of them. And so it was kind of a different shift from the underlining, like, always compete type of mentality. Like, Pete Carroll was so dialed in, like, after being in the game for so long, coming from the NFL, having a process that he knew what worked. I think Lane, as a head coach back at USC, he was a tight end coach there under Pete Carroll. So he knew what Pete was all about. I think he tried to make it his own and put a few twists on things that a lot of them worked and some of them didn't, but he was fun to play for.
Yeah, dude, I love playing for Lane. Like, he was hell in a handbasket at times, but like when you talk about playing for a guy that knows how to, like you said, get the most out of you, know how to get players open. Like, if you're a skill guy, if you're a running back, if you're a tight end, you're a receiver, or as a quarterback, just opening the field up and just creating an environment to where you can take shots, you can take some risks, get some big profits, and just like, he knows how to out scheme defenses. And I've always wondered, because when I look at Steve, because you had Lane Kiffin, obviously, but then you also had Steve Sarkisian on that staff. Now, those two combined, like, I would say after Kiffin, Steve has definitely got to be the second best play caller that I ever played with.
Yep.
Do you think that playing under Pete Carroll, with him being such a defensive-minded guy, do you think that helped those guys understand defenses better and see how to checkmate them? Like, can you see that being a part of their evolution into the great offensive minds that they are today?
Oh, yeah. And you could probably relate to this, but I remember, like, practices were the hardest part of the whole season.
Shit.
Like trying to, especially my freshman year when Pete was there, going up against like Taylor Mays. They were like Will Harris, Terrell Thomas, who played in the league forever. There were like dudes on defense who were scheming it up, and it was competition getting after it, to where you got to game day and you're like, oh, this is easy. And so I think, one, it helped those offensive coaches, understand defenses more. And now, especially playing in the league for so long, like that Hawk 3 defense or whatever you want to call it, from Pete Carroll's family tree with like the Dan Quinns, that tree has trickled down into so many defenses. And it's what I grew up playing against every single day in practice. And at the same time, I definitely think it helped those coordinators, like when Lane was calling plays, Sark, Jeremy Bates, even for a little bit, they had more freedom and control over the offense, and it challenged them to kind of be one step ahead and to see what boundaries they could push. So I mean, Pete's coaching tree is incredible, and now to see what Sark and Lane are doing in the SEC and as head coaches, it speaks to just that history and how they've grown over the years.
Yeah, I mean, shit, that sounded exactly like an Alabama practice because you got Lane Kiffin on one side, you got Nick Saban on the other.
Yep.
You've got Jalen Hurts, myself, Najee Harris, guys like Derrick Henry, like all of these guys versus Minka Fitzpatrick, Deron Payne, Reuben Foster, Marlon Humphrey, Eddie Jackson.
Yep.
So yes, that element of practice is way harder than the games, but also as an offensive player or a coordinator like Kiffin, Sark, whoever, like when you're coaching against Nick Saban every single week, like every single day even, like you start to learn and pick up things of how to checkmate defense and stuff. So yeah, no, he definitely fit right in Alabama the way you're describing him. But I want to hit on something though, Matt, and I don't know if this is controversial or not. I had a thought, I want to bring it up. You spoke to Sports Illustrated about the 2012 season and had some intriguing things to say after you graduated. And I quote, "I learned how to handle adversity last season. Maybe I could have done a few things differently. I could have had a bigger voice, given more input, and taken it to the next level. Pretty much as the owner of a company might, not just letting things happen. You put your faith in your coaches, but when you see trends, things not happening the right way, and when the team rests on your shoulders, it's almost like you have to step up. You can't just let things go by and watch them disintegrate in front of you. You've got to put the glue in somewhere. Looking back, I wish I'd been more forceful." Can you take us inside your thought process? Take us inside the program at the time under Kiffin that had you feel that way? Like, the floor is yours to kind of break down that quote.
That's a deep cut, dude. Where'd you? I don't even remember saying that. That's a.
Yeah, usually guys don't. Usually when you bring up something, somebody says like, "Did I really say that? Damn."
That's a good pull right there.
Yeah, take us back to like 20-year-old Matt Barkley at this time.
Sheesh. Well, so that senior season, we had high hopes, high hopes, especially my junior year. If you followed USC, that was the last year we couldn't play in a bowl game, but we finished that year beating Oregon, a top 10 team, up in Autzen Stadium, which is a hard place to play. And we beat UCLA 50-0. We had a lot of big wins that year, and vibes were high. Like we were feeling it. We thought we could have won the Rose Bowl, if not done more that year in 2011. And so coming back for that senior year, there was a lot I learned. And given all the hype and everything, we had a few injuries early in the season that kind of set us back. And I think that quote was probably looking back after that season of things that I wish I probably could have done better, including just stepping up and being a bigger voice. And most of my early career, I was always like a lead by example type guy of doing the right things. I would count every rep. I would have my foot behind the line, like all those little things. And it took me a while to grow into being confident and comfortable to use my voice, to call out guys, to, whether it's talking to the team, calling some guy out in front of everyone, knowing like he needs to be exposed to get better, or sometimes it's bringing a guy off to the side one-on-one and challenging him, or saying, "I believe in you. Like, you need to pick this up." And even going to the coaching staff to kind of get a better grasp of what was going on. Because I was kind of just trusting the process, like we've been taught over and over and over again. And when that wasn't always working or the results weren't showing, sometimes the process does need to change. And so I think looking back on that year, I realized that and wish that whether it was talking through protections more or understanding personnel in a better way, because like obviously I wish I knew what I know now after being in the league and just all the intricacies that go into game planning. But in college, you're going to classes, you show up for meetings, you're like, "Yes, sir, I study my thing and we're good to go." But just having that extra layer of input, of just kind of assertiveness with where we were headed and some of the close losses that we had, just how to fix that. Learned a lot from that year. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when I read the quote, like from my perspective, it didn't sound like you were trying to be critical of Lane or necessarily the program, but it sounded like you just wanted to take more accountability, and you felt like if you had done that, you guys could have had a better product at the end of the year. And like I feel that as great of a play caller as he is, as great of a football mind as he is, you can tell me if you see this a little bit differently, but he's not as much about the accountability factors. He's not as much about getting guys to do the extra work. He's not about, making sure, like, I want to have a quarterback who stays and study extra or, spends extra time with his offensive line. All he cares about is the product that goes on the field on Saturday. And, that's hard when you're a head coach, especially a young guy, because Lane was young at the time. And obviously through the coaches that he's been under and his experience, he's gotten better. But, I felt like having Nick Saban at the head of the ship really kind of reeled him in, because it was about more than just like, okay, on Saturday, we're going to go out and we're going to put up 500 yards of offense, and this is how we're going to do it. Like, we had to work each and every day in practice to figure out, like, how are we going to beat this Nick Saban defense Monday through Friday? And the way that we started to do that was we started meeting more. Like, Lane had us in there more. He had us paying more attention to details. So I can kind of see, with your quote and then my experience with Lane, how you could have felt that way. Because, again, you guys didn't have a Nick Saban kind of proceeding him to make sure that he challenged his players with that same level of accountability that you wanted to have yourself. So, but like I said, Lane he's learned, he's grown, he's had the opportunity to right some wrongs from the past. But how they just knocked off Georgia last week, so they're clearly rolling.